My son, Michael, adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror, his knuckles white. The car, a sleek, silent German sedan that cost more than my first house, hummed around us, a bubble of conditioned air and unspoken tension. Outside, the grand entrance to the Oakwood Country Club glowed under the Connecticut twilight, a beacon for the life he had built, a life I was merely visiting. "Mum," he began, his voice low, almost a plead. He couldn't quite meet my eyes in the mirror. "Please, just don't embarrass us tonight." His wife, Jessica, sitting in the passenger seat, didn't turn, but I saw her shoulders tighten, a silent, emphatic endorsement of his words. Embarrass them. The phrase hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He thought he knew me so well. He thought I was predictable, that I would sit quietly in my designated corner, smiling politely, a benign relic from his past, there to maintain the illusion of a wholesome family. He forgot that I have always been more than the muted, faded version of myself they preferred. When the valet opened my door, the warm evening air felt charged. As I stepped out, I felt their gazes, 100 pairs of eyes assessing me. My simple navy blue dress, my graying hair pulled back in a simple knot, my hands that weren't adorned with jewels. They were all waiting for me to confirm their silent expectation that I would be discreet, invisible. But something inside me, a long dormant volcano of truth and stifled identity, was beginning to rumble. I walked into the grand ballroom, a sea of champagne flutes and forced laughter, and I felt like a ghost. But tonight, this ghost had a voice. I walked past the curated floral arrangements and the ice sculptures, my steps firm, my destination clear. I walked to the center of the room, to the small stage where a microphone stood, waiting for the evening's toasts. And then I announced, well, let's just say the words that came out of my mouth changed everything. Because in that moment, I decided I would no longer be the invisible woman, the submissive mother, the guest who only observes. I had secrets to reveal, truths to set free, and one last chance to show them all who I really am. What happened after that sentence echoed far beyond that night. And yes, my son never asked me not to embarrass him again, because he learned that some truths must be spoken, no matter the cost. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The ballroom was a masterpiece of Jessica's design. Everything was in shades of cream and gold, exuding a kind of wealth that was so profound it didn't need to be loud, though it was. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music a tasteful, expensive wallpaper. This was their 10th anniversary party, but it was also a celebration of Michael's promotion to partner at his prestigious New York law firm. It was the culmination of his life's ambitions, and by extension, Jessica's. My role was simple: to be the humble origin story, the before picture that made the after look so much more impressive. Jessica's parents, the Everetts, held court near the towering cake, their laughter booming with the confidence of old money. Mrs. Everett, a woman who looked like she was carved from marble, greeted me with a kiss that never touched my cheek. "Eleanor, so good of you to come all this way," she said, her eyes sweeping over my dress with a flicker of something between pity and disdain. "Michael is doing such wonderful things. You must be so proud." I was proud, of course, but my pride was a complex, tangled thing. I was proud of the boy who used to spend hours in his room, studying until he fell asleep on his books. I was proud of his determination, but the man he had become, this polished stranger in a bespoke suit, was someone I was still getting to know. He was a product of this environment, shaped and molded by Jessica's ambitions and the relentless pressure to climb higher. I found a small table near the back, a safe harbor in the glittering sea of strangers. I watched Michael work the room, a charming smile fixed on his face, a hand always ready to shake. Jessica was a swan, gliding from group to group, her laughter like tiny tinkling bells. They were a perfect couple, a portrait of success. I was the smudge on the edge of the canvas. I remembered the day Michael got his acceptance letter to Yale. He'd run into the house, waving the thick envelope, his face alight with a pure, unadulterated joy I hadn't seen in years. My husband, Robert, had been gone for 2 years by then. He was a painter, a man who saw the world in color and light, but who never saw much in his bank account. We lived a life rich in love and art, but perpetually poor in cash. On his deathbed, his hands thin and papery in mine, he'd made me promise. Ellie, he'd whispered, his voice raspy, don't let my failures hold him back. Give our boy the world, I had promised. It was a promise I intended to keep, no matter the cost to myself. Robert left me with a mountain of debt and a studio full of canvases he considered his life's work, but the world had considered worthless, abstract, emotional pieces that critics of our small town had dismissed as confused messes of color. To me, they were beautiful, they were his soul. A waiter offered me a glass of champagne, and I took it, the bubbles tickling my nose. I saw Jessica talking to a group of women, their heads tilted together conspiratorially. She glanced in my direction, a small, apologetic smile on her face, and I could read her lips even from across the room. She's sweet, but very simple, from a different world, you know. A different world. It was true. My world was one of patched knees and second-hand books, of making a single chicken last for 3 meals, of finding beauty in a sunset because it was free. Their world was one where success was measured in car models and country club memberships. What they never understood was that their world was built entirely on the foundations of mine. The comment didn't sting as much as it clarified. The slow burn of resentment I'd been nursing for years finally ignited. It wasn't just about the slights, the condescending tones, the casual dismissals. It was about the erasure of my husband's legacy. It was about the fundamental lie their entire life was built upon. I looked at Michael, laughing with his managing partner, a man whose respect he had craved for a decade. He looked happy, he looked successful, but he looked hollow. He had traded his authentic self for this gilded cage, and he'd handed me the key to lock it from the outside, asking me to please not rattle the bars. I finished my champagne in one long swallow, the cold liquid a shock to my system. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I looked at the stage, at the lonely microphone. The string quartet was taking a break. A low murmur of conversation filled the room. It was time. It was time to give them back the truth. The first step was the hardest. It was a conscious decision to move from the shadows into the light. As I started walking, a few heads turned. My path took me directly past Jessica's parents. Mr. Everett, who was in the middle of a story about his yacht, faltered, his eyes following me with open curiosity. I saw Michael's head snap in my direction. His smile vanished. His face, for a fleeting second, showed the terrified boy he used to be, caught doing something wrong. His eyes widened, a silent, desperate plea, "Don't." Jessica saw his expression and followed his gaze to me. Her perfectly painted smile froze, then cracked, replaced by a mask of pure panic. She started to move toward me, to intercept, to manage the situation, but she was too far away, trapped in a conversation with the wife of a senior partner. The walk across the polished dance floor felt like a mile. The low hum of the room began to quiet as more people noticed the lone, determined woman in the simple navy dress, making a beeline for the stage. It was like a ripple effect. One conversation would die down, and the people in it would look to see what was happening, causing the next conversation to falter. By the time I reached the 2 short steps leading to the stage, a hush had fallen over the ballroom. All eyes were on me. The air was thick with confusion and anticipation. I stepped up onto the stage, and my hand closed around the cool, heavy microphone. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. I looked out at the sea of faces, a blur of wealth and expectation. I found Michael. He was standing frozen, his face pale. I gave him a small, sad smile. Then I began. "Good evening, everyone." My voice was shaky at first, a little breathless, but it amplified through the room, startling in the silence. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Eleanor Vance. I'm Michael's mother. A polite, confused smattering of applause broke out and quickly died. I wasn't on the schedule to speak tonight, I continued, my voice gaining strength. But I'm at an age where you realize that if you don't say the important things now, you may never get another chance. And tonight, as we celebrate a decade of marriage and a magnificent career, I feel it's important to talk about the foundation of the success we are all here to honor. I paused, letting the words settle. I saw Jessica whispering frantically to Michael, but he didn't seem to hear her. His gaze was locked on me. "My son is a brilliant man," I said, and I meant it. "He's driven, he's intelligent, and he has worked incredibly hard. Everyone talks about him being a self-made man, and he is in many ways. But I'm here to talk about the parts of the story that have been left out." I looked around the room, at the curious, judgmental faces. My late husband, Robert, was an artist. He wasn't a successful artist. In fact, by the world's standards, he was a failure. He left us with very little money. But he did leave me with a studio full of his paintings, which he believed were his legacy. I could feel the pity in the room. The poor widow, the simple mother. It was exactly what they expected. "What Michael and Jessica have never known," I said, my voice ringing with clarity, "is that my husband's worthless as art is what paid for Michael's entire Yale Law School education." A collective gasp swept through the room. It was a physical thing, a wave of sound. Michael staggered back a step, as if I had physically struck him. Jessica's face went from pale to ashen. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I continued, my words now flowing like a river that had broken through a dam. "I sold his first major collection to a private dealer in Boston. It was just enough to cover tuition, room and board. I told Michael a distant relative had left me a small inheritance. It was easier than explaining that his future was being paid for by a man he'd been subtly taught to be ashamed of for his lack of financial success. I turned my gaze to Jessica's parents, who were staring at me, mouths agape. The down payment on their beautiful first home in the city, the one you, Mr. and Mrs. Everett, were so impressed they managed on their own. That came from the sale of a single large canvas titled Sunrise over the Hudson. I believe you once called my husband's work depressing smears, Mrs. Everett. That depressing smear bought your daughter her first granite countertop." The silence that followed was absolute, profound. You could hear a champagne bubble pop. I wasn't done, and that lucky stock market investment a few years ago, the one that yielded such incredible returns and secured Michael's position for this partnership. The seed money wasn't from a bank loan he struggled to get, as the story goes. It was from me. It was the last of the money, from the sale of the final and most valuable piece in my husband's collection, a painting called Eleanor's Hope. I looked directly at my son. Tears were now streaming down his face, silent and devastating. He wasn't looking at the crowd, at his boss, or at his wife. He was looking at me, and for the first time in a decade, I think he was truly seeing me. "I didn't do this to hide anything," I said, my voice softening. "I did it because I wanted my son to feel that he had earned every bit of his success. I wanted him to walk with his head held high, unburdened by the sacrifices of the past. But I see now that in trying to give him that gift, I allowed a life to be built on a half-truth. A life that, in order to feel secure, required them to look down on me and on the simple, art-filled world that had lifted them up to these heights." I placed the microphone back in its stand with a soft click. "So please enjoy the party, enjoy the champagne and the beautiful music, but know that it was all paid for by the love of a man who believed art was more valuable than money. It turns out he was right. Now I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below." I didn't wait for a reaction. I didn't need to. I turned, walked down the steps of the stage and headed for the grand double doors of the ballroom. It felt as though I was parting the Red Sea. People didn't just move out of my way. They recoiled, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and second-hand embarrassment. No one said a word. The silence was my standing ovation. I didn't look back at Michael or Jessica. I couldn't. My part was done. The truth was out, a living, breathing thing in that suffocatingly perfect room. As I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the cool, humid night, The sound of the party of my son's life was sealed off behind me. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under my sensible shoes as I walked past the line of luxury cars, ignoring the confused look from the valet who had taken my son's keys just an hour before. I felt a profound sense of lightness, as if I had set down a suitcase I'd been carrying for 20 years. I walked down the long, winding driveway of the country club, the moonlight my only guide. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going. For the first time in my adult life, my path wasn't dictated by the needs of my husband or my son, it was just mine. My phone started buzzing in my purse almost immediately. Michael, I ignored it. It buzzed again. Jessica. I silenced it and kept walking. By the time I reached the main road, a cab I'd called on my phone was pulling up. As I climbed in, I felt the first tremor of an aftershock. My heart was pounding, a wild drum against my ribs. It wasn't regret, it was liberation, pure and terrifying. I went back to the small one-bedroom apartment they paid for, a fact that had always felt like a form of charity, a leash. Tonight, it felt different. It felt like a base, a starting point. I slept more soundly that night than I had in years. The next day, the story came to me in pieces. My niece, Sarah, Michael's cousin, called me in the afternoon. She had been there. Her voice was a hushed mix of admiration and concern. "Aunt Ellie, you were incredible," she whispered. "I've never seen anything like it." She told me the party had imploded. The moment I left, a horrifying silence held for what felt like an eternity before Jessica's mother let out a strangled sob. The guests, not knowing where to look, began to make their excuses, melting away into the night. Jessica, Sarah said, had screamed at Michael in a furious whisper, her face contorted with rage and humiliation, before her parents whisked her away. Michael's boss, the managing partner, had clapped him on the shoulder, said something brief and unintelligible, and left. Michael was left standing alone in the center of the near-empty ballroom, amidst the wilting flowers and the half-empty glasses, looking utterly and completely broken. I didn't hear from him for a week. A part of me, the mother part, was sick with worry. Another, newer part of me knew this silence was necessary. He had to sit in the rubble of the life he had so carefully constructed. He had to decide which pieces were worth saving. During that week, I began to reclaim my own life. I went into the spare closet where I kept Robert's things. I pulled out his old paint-stained easel and his boxes of dried-up tubes of acrylics and worn-out brushes. I went to the art supply store and bought myself a new set, the smell of the fresh paint and turpentine filling me with a forgotten joy. I set up the easel by the window that looked out over a small city park, and I began to paint. It was clumsy at first, my hands unsure, but then something broke free. I wasn't trying to paint like Robert. I was painting for myself, messy, vibrant, emotional paintings. I was painting my anger, my grief, my loneliness, and my newfound terrifying freedom. Then, one Tuesday evening, the call came. "Mum," his voice was small, fragile. I didn't fill the silence. I waited. "Why?" he asked, the word cracking. "Why would you do that to us? To me?" "I didn't do it to you, Michael," I said calmly, my own voice surprising me with its steadiness. "I did it for me. I did it for your father. I did it for the truth. You destroyed my career. Jessica won't even speak to me. Her parents think we're frauds," he said, his voice rising with panic and accusation. "Your career was built on your father's legacy," I replied. "Your marriage was built on Jessica's image. You need to ask yourself what part of it was ever really yours, what part of it was real." He was silent for a long time. I could hear his shaky breaths. "I love you, Michael," I said softly, "but I will no longer be the silent secret that holds up your gilded cage. You're a man now, you have to decide what kind of man you want to be." I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly. The ball was in his court. Weeks turned into 2 months. The autumn leaves in the park outside my window turned from green to brilliant shades of orange and red. then fell, leaving the branches bare. I painted them through every stage. My apartment, once just a place to sleep, had become a studio, a sanctuary. Canvases were stacked against the walls, filled with the colors of my new life. I had reconnected with old friends, women I had drifted away from during the years I was consumed with being Michael's mother. We had coffee, went to matinee movies, and talked about our lives, our regrets, our hopes. I was becoming Eleanor again. I had almost given up hope of hearing from Michael when my buzzer rang one rainy Saturday afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone. I pressed the intercom button. "Hello? It's me, Mum." It was Michael. My heart skipped a beat. "I'm coming down," I said. When I opened the lobby door, he was standing there on the steps, drenched, holding a small, slightly wilted bouquet of daisies, my favorite. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit or a designer coat. He was in jeans and a simple sweater, looking younger and more vulnerable than I had seen him in 15 years. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his eyes full of a pain so deep it ached to see it. Then he took a step forward and wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my shoulder. His body shook with silent sobs. I held him just as I had when he was a little boy who had fallen off his bike. We went up to my apartment, and he looked around at the canvases, his eyes wide. He walked from one to the other, touching the edge of a frame, his expression unreadable. "You're painting again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am," I said simply. We sat at my small kitchen table with mugs of tea. He finally started to talk. He told me everything. He and Jessica had separated. The fallout from the party was catastrophic for her, a social apocalypse from which she couldn't recover. Her life was based on a carefully curated image of perfection, and I had shattered it. She blamed him, she blamed me, she blamed everyone but herself. He said that in the silence of their cavernous apartment, he started to see the truth in my words. He realized he had been running so hard and so fast toward a life he thought he wanted that he'd forgotten who he was and where he came from. He had been so ashamed of our simple life, so desperate to fit into Jessica's world, that he had willingly belittled his own foundation. "I found your old letters to Dad," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "The ones from when he was trying to get his first gallery show. You believed in him so much, and I just remembered him being broke. He was rich in everything but money, Michael," I said softly. "It took me a long time to see that too." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Can you forgive me, Mum? For everything? For that night? For the years before, for being so blind?" "There's nothing to forgive," I told him, reaching across the table to take his hand. "You just got lost. We all get lost sometimes. Our relationship isn't what it was. It's better, it's messier, more honest, and infinitely more real. He comes over every Sunday for dinner. He helps me stretch my canvases. He asks me about his father, eager to hear the stories he once dismissed. He's in therapy trying to untangle the man he is from the man he was pretending to be. Sometimes, he brings his own sketchbook, and we sit in comfortable silence by the window, drawing the world outside. He hasn't fixed things with Jessica, and his career is in a state of flux, but for the first time, he isn't scared. He's building a new life, one based not on a perfect image, but on a true foundation. I have my son back. But more importantly, I have myself back. And I've learned that sometimes, the most embarrassing thing you can do is tell the truth, and sometimes, it's the only thing that can set you free. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.